My name is Maya, and when I was 16 my parents decided I was the extra piece in a puzzle that never had space for me. They called Adam the future, the miracle, our son, with capital letters you could hear. I was the spare, the apology they never said out loud. When the accident happened, a Friday slick with rain and bad choices, I climbed into the back of the cruiser and told the officer I had been driving. Adam's breath reeked of whiskey. Mine reeked of loyalty. The deal was supposed to be simple, a juvenile warning, community service, a promise to do better. But that night rewrote every script. Mom waited until the officer left, then folded her arms like the lid of a coffin. Dad didn't look at me, he looked through me. You've embarrassed this family, he said, as if embarrassment hadn't been living with us for years. Adam, white as the curb he'd bounced over, whispered thanks I couldn't hear. They didn't yell. That would have meant I mattered. They moved like a practiced team. Mom fetched a black trash bag, Dad pointed to my room, Adam hovered with a heroic tilt of the chin. You'll learn responsibility, Dad said. You want to act grown, be grown. Mom added, come back when you can contribute. I remember the clock over the sink clicking, the second hand loud as knuckles on a door. I packed the way people do in disaster movies, stupid, fast, choosing the wrong things. A sweater with a hole. 2 notebooks. The photo strip of me and Grandma Ellie making fish faces in a booth at the summer fair. I forgot socks. I remembered the bruised blue of the cruiser's lights still flickering on the window glass. When the bag was full, the plastic stretched like it might split. It matched the feeling in my chest. Outside, the rain had turned into air you could drink. The porch light made a little island of gold on the cracked steps. Dad handed me $40 like it was a coupon, not a bridge. Mom closed the door while I was still on the top step, and the latch caught a piece of my hair. I didn't cry. Crying would have required oxygen, and I had none. I walked. The trash bag bumped my leg, a clumsy shadow. At the end of our street I passed the stop sign Adam had ignored, a red mouth telling me to halt and think. I kept going. The bus station sat behind the grocery store where I'd once bagged groceries for tips I never kept because Mom said family first. Now family was a locked house and a porch light that wasn't mine. A woman in a janitor's uniform pushed a mop across the station floor with slow, gentle strokes, like she was comforting the tiles. You okay, honey? She asked. I learned later her name was Tasha. That night I said, yes, because yes was easier than the truth. She slid a paper cup of coffee toward me anyway. It tasted like burnt courage. I counted my money and bought a ticket nowhere far, just the late bus to the other side of town, where no one knew my last name. On the seat, I opened the bag to reorganize and found something that didn't belong, a tiny velvet pouch tucked in the corner, knotted with blue thread. I knew that thread. Grandma Ellie wrapped gifts with it, for luck, she'd whisper, tying it twice so the wish wouldn't leak out. Inside the pouch lay a brass key and a folded note smelling faintly of lavender drawer liners. The note was 3 lines, elliptical and careful in her looping hand, for when they forget who you are. Corner of Maple and 3rd, love needs doors, too. The bus jolted forward. Streetlights smeared into commas. I pressed the key into my palm and felt its teeth. Maybe I wasn't being thrown out. Maybe I was being pointed toward a lock I hadn't known existed. The thought didn't fix the hole in my sweater, the $40, the ache of a door closing. But it made the night blink, and for the first time since the cruiser, I could breathe. When the bus hissed to a stop at Maple and 3rd, the rain had thinned into mist. I stepped out clutching my trash bag, the brass key pressing into my palm like it had a heartbeat. The neighborhood was quiet, half asleep, peeling porches, flickering street lamps, a stray cat darting under a fence. At the corner stood an old duplex with a dented mailbox and faded blue shutters. I didn't need a sign to know this was Grandma Ellie's place. I hesitated before the door. She hadn't spoken to my parents in years, they said she was unstable, bitter, living in the past. Maybe that was true, but I was past the point of caring. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned with a sigh, like a door remembering an old promise. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon and dust. A single lamp glowed beside the couch, illuminating a folded quilt, a book left open, and a plate with 2 cookies gone stale. I thought she'd be asleep. But then I heard her voice from the hallway, soft, creaky, but alive. "Maya?" I turned, and there she was, in her robe, eyes glassy but kind. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she opened her arms. I didn't realize I'd been shaking until I felt her steady hands on my back. I cried quietly, like rain slipping off a roof. "I knew they'd do it," she whispered. "They've been planning it for months. They think breaking you will make you forget who you are. But I see you, baby. You're not broken, you're just unclaimed." That night, I slept on her couch under a blanket she said she'd made for me when I was a baby. I didn't ask why she'd never given it to me, some questions belong to silence. I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sight of her scribbling in her notebook, the same lavender-scented pages she'd used for years. Lists of love, she called them. Over the next few weeks, Grandma taught me survival in small, stubborn ways. How to stretch $1, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to laugh even when nothing was funny. I enrolled in night school, cleaned offices, and worked at a diner on weekends. When I told her about the accident, how I'd taken the blame for Adam, she just shook her head. "They'll need you again someday," she said. "But by then, you won't need them." Life wasn't easy, but it was mine. I saved every tip, every extra shift. I built something out of scraps, first stability, then ambition. I didn't realize I was changing until one night, 2 years later, when the phone rang and Grandma passed it to me. It was my mother's voice, sharp and tired. "Your brother's in trouble again," she said. "You need to come home." The old fear flickered, but it didn't last. "I don't live there anymore," I said quietly. And before she could reply, I hung up. That same week, Grandma's health started to fade. Doctor visits, medications, quiet nights. I began working double shifts to cover everything. She never complained, she just smiled at me with that knowing look, the one that said she'd seen worse and survived. Then, one morning, I came home from work to find the kitchen empty and her notebook gone from the table. The police said it looked peaceful. I found her in her armchair, eyes closed, a cup of cold tea beside her, and a sealed envelope with my name written in blue ink. The note read, "You were never the spare, my Maya. You were the seed. When you bloom, let no one convince you it was luck. Love, always, Grandma." I buried her with that key in my pocket. It felt like the end of something, but also the quiet beginning of a life that would finally belong to me. Grief doesn't vanish overnight, it seeps into everything like spilled ink. After Grandma Ellie's funeral, the house felt too quiet, too large for just one heartbeat. Her presence lingered in the smell of lavender, in the uneven hum of the refrigerator, in the creak of the floorboards when I walked at night. For the first time I was completely alone, no family, no safety net, just me and a handful of bills. I was 17 with a high school diploma earned through exhaustion and determination. I took the first job that would have me, cleaning offices downtown at night and serving breakfast at a café during the day. Sleep became a luxury, not a necessity. My hands blistered, my back ached, and sometimes I'd catch sight of myself in the café's mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, and not recognize the girl looking back. But I was still standing, and that counted for something. Money trickled in slowly. I learned to stretch every dollar the way Grandma taught me. I rented a room in a crumbling house where the walls smelled like mold and the heat worked only when it wanted to. My landlord, Mr. Patel, was kind enough to let me pay late when tips were bad. "You've got fire, girl," he said once, when I came home in the snow after a 12-hour day. "Don't let the cold put it out." College wasn't even a dream then, it was a word people like me didn't say out loud. But I wanted more than survival. Grandma's note burned in my mind, "You were the seed." So I enrolled in night classes at the community college, studying business administration. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it, only that it might open a door. The first semester nearly broke me. I'd finish my cafe shift at 3 p.m., nap for an hour, then rush to class until 9. By the time I got home, I was too tired to cook. Some nights, I'd eat a pack of crackers and fall asleep on my books. But I kept going. Because every paycheck, every grade, every bruise from a tray or mop handle was proof I was building something, brick by brick, out of the wreckage they left me in. There were moments of grace, too. Mrs. Nguyen, the cafe owner, noticed my work ethic. One day, she pulled me aside and said, "You're too smart to pour coffee forever." I started with one sandwich cart. Now I own 3 cafes. You'll build something, too, I see it. She started showing me how to manage orders, suppliers, and inventory. Without realizing it, she was teaching me business long before my textbooks did. Then came the letter. My name on an envelope, postmarked from my parents' address, a house I hadn't seen since the night of the trash bag. My heart stumbled. Inside was a short note written in my mother's sharp, slanted handwriting. "We heard about your grandmother. I hope you're not expecting anything from us. She should have left that house to family, not a runaway. You'll regret choosing her over us." No signature. No condolences. Just venom on paper. I burned it over the sink, watching the words curl into ash. That night, I made myself a promise that I would never again let them decide my worth. I didn't want revenge, I wanted distance. Power. Freedom. 2 years later, I graduated with honors. I saved every penny I could, and with a small loan and Mrs. Nguyen's guidance, I opened a tiny food stall at the farmer's market. It was nothing fancy, just homemade soups and sandwiches made from cheap ingredients and stubborn hope. The first week, I made $87. The second, $200. By the third, people were lining up before I arrived. I named it Maya's Table. The same people who once walked past me without seeing me now came back for seconds. It wasn't just about food, it was about survival turned into flavor. Every bowl of soup carried a story of endurance, every smile a quiet victory. And for the first time since I was 16, I didn't feel like I was running from my past. I was building something worth staying for. Success has a strange way of creeping up on you, quietly, like dawn. One moment you're scraping together bus fare, and the next, people start saying your name with respect instead of pity. By the time I turned 25, Maya's Table had grown from a humble stall into a small cafe on the corner of Maple and Fifth, the same neighborhood where Grandma's house once stood. I painted the walls a warm shade of yellow, the color of sunlight after rain. The sign above the door read Maya's Table, food made from second chances. Every time I looked at it, I thought of her smile and that note she'd left me, "You were the seed." I guess she was right. The cafe became my heartbeat. Every morning, I opened at 6, serving coffee and breakfast to tired commuters. By noon, the tables filled with laughter, laptop screens, and the smell of cinnamon rolls. I hired staff, people like me who'd been underestimated, overlooked, or told they'd never make it. One of them, a single mom named Rachel, once said, "You don't just give jobs, Maya. You give people their names back." Within a year, we were featured in the local paper. From homeless teen to cafe owner, the woman behind Maya's Table. The article went viral, not that I expected it to. Suddenly, people wanted interviews, partnerships, recipes, even motivational talks. I was proud, yes, but also uneasy. Because success doesn't just attract opportunity. It attracts ghosts. The first message came from an unknown number. "Hey sis, it's Adam. Long time. Heard about your cafe, congrats. We should catch up sometime." My hand froze around my phone. I hadn't heard from him in almost a decade. The last time I'd seen his face was in the glow of police lights. I didn't reply. A week later, my parents called. Or rather, my mother did, her tone sugary, foreign, almost rehearsed. "Maya, honey. Your father and I are so proud of you. We always knew you'd make something of yourself." I almost laughed. You kicked me out with a trash bag, I said flatly. Oh, sweetheart, she sighed, like I was exaggerating. That was so long ago. Families fight. Let's move forward. Actually, we've been going through a rough patch financially. Your father's company downsized, and Adam's having trouble finding work. We just thought, maybe, we could stay with you for a while? Just until things settle. There it was, the real reason for the sudden warmth. They hadn't called out of love. They'd called out of need. I'm sorry, I said, steady as stone. The house is full. But you have that big new place, don't you? The one worth almost $1 million? Her voice cracked with greed, not grief. She'd done her research. I could almost see her sitting at the kitchen table, rehearsing every line before dialing. I have space, I said. Just not for people who only show up when I'm useful. And then, I hung up on her. That night, I sat in the empty cafe long after closing, staring at the lights reflecting off the glass. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing my parents say they were proud. I'd imagined what it might feel like, forgiveness, maybe even love. But what I felt instead was freedom. A few weeks later, Adam showed up in person. He stood outside the cafe in a cheap suit, holding flowers, looking every bit the prodigal son. You've changed, he said with a half-smile. So have you, I answered. He told me their house had been repossessed. Their savings gone. My parents were living in a motel. He wanted to rebuild the family. I told him I wished him well, but that rebuilding requires a foundation, and ours had been ash for years. Before he left, he said quietly, "You'll regret this one day." But as I locked the cafe door behind him, I realized, regret was a luxury I'd already burned to the ground. Still, as much as I wanted to move on, a storm was brewing. I didn't know it yet, but my family wasn't done with me. And the next time they came knocking, they wouldn't be asking for forgiveness. They'd be demanding what they thought was owed. It started with the sound of knocking, sharp, impatient, relentless. The kind of knocking that doesn't ask permission, it demands it. It was a gray Saturday morning, the cafe still closed, the air thick with the smell of fresh bread. I thought maybe it was a delivery, until I heard my mother's voice. Maya. We know you're in there. My stomach sank. I'd been avoiding their calls for weeks, but I never imagined they'd show up uninvited. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to look them in the eyes and see if there was even a trace of remorse. There wasn't. My parents stood there like ghosts wearing new clothes, Dad in a faded polo, Mom clutching her purse as if it were a trophy. Adam lingered behind them, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. Finally, Mom said, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. We were freezing out there. This isn't your house, I said, but my voice felt small in the doorway. Oh, stop it with the attitude, she snapped. We're family. Families help each other. You've done well, good for you. Now it's time to give back. Give back? I repeated. Dad cleared his throat. We lost the house. The bank took everything. We need a place to stay, just until we get back on our feet. You've got all this space now. It's only fair. The word fair twisted something in me. Fair. The way they'd called it fair when they threw me out at 16. Fair when they let me take the blame for Adam. Fair when they cut me off like a diseased branch. I took a slow breath. No, I said simply. Mom's jaw tightened. Excuse me? You heard me, I said, louder now. You don't get to show up after a decade of silence and expect me to clean up your mess. You kicked me out with nothing but a trash bag. You said I was worthless. I believed you for years. But not anymore. Adam stepped forward, voice low and bitter. Don't be dramatic, Maya. You're rich now. What's the big deal? We're talking about family. I met his eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me through a rearview mirror before everything shattered. Family doesn't use you as a shield and then forget you exist. Mom's expression hardened into something cold, familiar. You've become so ungrateful, she hissed. After everything we did for you. What exactly did you do for me? I asked. You gave me a roof, and then you took it away. You gave me a name, and then you made it a curse. Silence. The kind that hums with truth. Dad muttered something about me being heartless. Mom's eyes shimmered with false tears. Adam shook his head and walked toward the door, but not before saying, "You'll regret this when we tell everyone what kind of daughter you've become." I let them leave. I didn't chase them, didn't shout. I just stood there, heart pounding, until the sound of their car faded into nothing. That evening, I sat alone at the counter of my café and thought about their threat, "We'll tell everyone." For years, they'd controlled the story, the perfect family, the troublemaking daughter, the ungrateful runaway. I realized that if I stayed silent, they'd rewrite history again. And that was when the idea came, not revenge, but revelation. I opened my laptop, pulled up my email, and started typing. I wrote to every relative, every family friend who'd ever believed my parents' version of events. I told the truth, all of it. The accident. The lies. The night they kicked me out. The years of silence. I attached the police report, the old photos, even the copy of my grandmother's will proving how they'd tried to steal from her too. When I hit send, my hands shook. But for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was from freedom. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages, cousins, uncles, people I barely remembered. Shock. Sympathy. Apologies. And then one final message that made me catch my breath. It was from Adam's wife, Rachel. "Maya, thank you for telling the truth. I had no idea what they'd done to you, or what Adam's done to me. I'm leaving him. You deserve peace. And maybe, so do I." I didn't reply right away. I just looked out the window at the sunrise spilling over the street and realized something I'd waited years to understand. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from punishment. It comes from finally being heard. And for the first time in my life, my story was mine. My aunt called first. "Maya, sweetheart, I had no idea," she said, her voice trembling. "Your parents always said you were troubled. We believed them." I didn't know what to say. For years I'd begged to be believed, and now, when it finally happened, it felt strangely quiet inside me. Like I'd already made peace with the pain. By noon, my parents' version of damage control began. They posted a long Facebook message claiming I was mentally unstable and brainwashed by resentment. I didn't respond. Truth didn't need defending. It just needed light. The cafe that day was busier than ever. Customers came in with kind words, some even hugging me. "You inspire me," one woman said, tears in her eyes. I left a toxic family too. Later that week, Adam's wife, Rachel, stopped by in person. She looked tired but free, her wedding ring gone. "You gave me courage," she said quietly. "You showed me that walking away isn't losing. It's surviving." That night, after closing, I stood alone in the cafe, staring at Grandma Ellie's photo on the wall. For years, I'd carried the weight of silence. Now it was gone, replaced by something lighter, not happiness exactly, but truth. And truth, I realized, could breathe. The storm passed quietly, leaving space for something new. Once the chaos died down, the cafe became more than a business, it became a refuge. People started coming not just for food, but for comfort. They shared their stories, of betrayal, of rebuilding, of finally choosing themselves. Somehow, Maya's table had turned into a place where broken hearts healed together. I began hosting second chance nights, free dinners for women starting over. Volunteers, laughter, soft music, it was everything I once needed but never had. Each time I saw someone smile after weeks of tears, I felt like I was finally giving back the grace Grandma gave me. One evening, after closing, I sat by the window, sipping tea. The city outside hummed with life, and for the first time, the silence didn't hurt. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't proving anything. I was living, fully, freely, and on my own terms. And when I looked at the photo of Grandma Ellie on the wall, I whispered, "I made it, Grandma. You were right. Seeds do grow, even in stone." It started with a phone call from the lawyer handling Grandma Ellie's estate. "There's one more document," he said. "We found it sealed inside a box in her attic. It's addressed to you." A week later, I stood in that same attic, dust motes dancing in the sunlight, the air thick with memories. The box was small, tied with blue thread, her signature touch. Inside was a stack of letters, a few old photographs, and one envelope marked "For when the time is right." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Maya," it began, "I always knew you'd find your way. But there are things you deserve to know. Your parents tried to take this house after I passed. They forged papers, lied about debts, and planned to sell it behind your back. I stopped them, legally, and publicly. This home is yours, forever. Let it remind you that love cannot be stolen, and truth cannot be buried." At the bottom, she'd added a single line, "When you find peace, share it." Tears slipped down my cheeks. She'd protected me even after death, standing guard against the same people who once threw me away. I looked around the attic, the scent of lavender still faint in the wood, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not sorrow. Peace. I closed the box gently and whispered, "I'll share it, Grandma. I promise." I couldn't stop thinking about that final line in Grandma's letter, "When you find peace, share it." It sounded simple, but I knew it wasn't. Peace isn't something you stumble upon, it's something you build, piece by piece, out of pain, forgiveness, and truth. For weeks, I carried her words with me everywhere, written on a scrap of paper in my pocket, whispered to myself on long nights at the café. And then one morning, as I watched a young woman crying over coffee, I understood what Grandma meant. Maya's table had already become a haven, but I wanted it to be more, not just a café, but a sanctuary for anyone who'd been made to feel small, forgotten, or unwanted. I began organizing weekly gatherings called Open Hearts. People came to share their stories, survivors of abuse, estranged children, recovering addicts, single parents rebuilding from nothing. There were tears, yes, but also laughter, hope, and connection. Soon, we outgrew the café. Volunteers offered to help. A local church lent us their hall. Donations started pouring in from people who'd read my story online, some from as far away as Australia and Japan. A journalist even called it the movement of second chances. With their help, I founded the Ellie Foundation, a non-profit offering housing support, job training, and counseling for young people who'd been kicked out or abandoned like I once was. The first shelter we opened stood on the same street where I'd once spent a night outside in the rain, clutching a trash bag. When we cut the ribbon, I couldn't hold back tears. The press asked me what inspired it all. I smiled and said, "A key." Because that's where it had all begun, a small brass key from a woman who saw me when no one else did. In the months that followed, I received hundreds of letters from people who said my story gave them courage to start again. One girl wrote, "I read your post and left my abusive home that night. I'm safe now. Thank you for showing me that survival isn't shameful, it's sacred." Sometimes, I'd walk through the shelter's quiet halls at night, hearing laughter echo down the corridor, and feel Grandma beside me. Her lavender scent, her soft hum. I knew she'd be proud, not because I'd succeeded, but because I'd turned pain into purpose. One evening, as the sun set behind the cafe windows, I realized something I never thought possible. I had forgiven them, my parents, Adam, even myself. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Grandma once told me that love needed doors. I finally understood. The door she opened with that little brass key wasn't just to her house, it was to the life I was meant to live. And now, I was holding it wide open for others. It took me nearly 10 years to return to the street where my childhood ended. The same cracked sidewalk, the same leaning mailbox, though the house itself looked smaller, almost fragile now. My parents no longer lived there. After the foreclosure, it had been rented to strangers. Still, standing there made my chest tighten with ghosts. I didn't come for them. I came for me. I parked my car across the street and watched the house in silence. For a long time, I thought healing would mean forgetting. But real healing, I realized, was remembering without bleeding. The house no longer had power over me. It was just wooden walls, not the monster I once thought it was. Before I left, I slipped a small envelope into the mailbox. Inside was a photograph, me standing in front of Ellie's table, surrounded by the volunteers and kids from the foundation. On the back, I'd written, "You taught me what love is not. She taught me what it is. I'm finally home." I didn't wait for them to see it. I didn't need to. When I drove away, sunlight spilled across the windshield, warm and golden, like Grandma's kitchen used to be. I thought of her key, now hanging on a chain around my neck. I wore it not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I found: courage, self-worth, and peace. That evening, back at the café, Rachel stopped by with her little girl. She'd started a new life, one filled with calm and honesty. "You look happy," she said. "I am," I replied, and it wasn't just words. We sat together, sharing coffee and stories, while laughter from the kitchen drifted through the air. Outside, the sign glowed softly: Maya's table, food made from second chances. Later that night, I walked through the quiet cafe, lights dimmed, the smell of cinnamon still lingering. I traced my fingers along the counter, feeling the pulse of everything built from nothing. This place, my life, was proof that even from pain, beauty could bloom. I looked up at Grandma Ellie's photo one last time and whispered, "You gave me the key, Grandma." I found the door. And for the first time in my life, I was truly home.